thank you for being the toughest leader any country could ask for in the toughest times any president has ever faced.
I suppose one could put Abraham Lincoln or George Washington into that mix, but in any case, that was Rahm Emanuel ending his time as White House Chief of Staff and heaping praise on his now former boss. And we're back now from Louisville and Washington with our panel. Before we get to Rahm, let's talk about the choice that the president now faces, because it seems clear that he's going to encounter very different circumstances in Washington after the election, with either a much smaller Democratic majority in the House and Senate or possibly Republican control of one or both houses. Britt, let me start with you. Does he move to the center like Bill Clinton did in 1995, or should he stay on the left and engage in partisan warfare for the next 2 years?
Well, Chris, I don't think we know. I mean, I think he would be, if this election turns out as it appears overwhelmingly likely to, that's a pretty clear sign that says don't keep doing what you're doing. It becomes a definition of insanity. My question, though, is will he be able and intellectually willing, as Bill Clinton was, to move to the center? Bill Clinton did that decisively and noticeably after the repudiation in 1994. This president is different. He didn't come from a southern state where he had to be reelected or elected as a moderate, as Bill Clinton had. He really doesn't have a lot of experience as a moderate. He talked like a moderate during his campaign 2 years ago, but he's governed pretty much from the left part of the American mainstream. And my sense about it is that I don't think this new interim chief of staff, Pete Rouse, is someone that can be counted on to tug him to the center the way, say, Dick Morris did with Bill Clinton after the election in 2008.
Mara, let me pick up on that, because if he decided to move to the center, to follow the Clinton model, and I think a lot of us agree that Pete Rouse might not be the guy who would be a good chief of staff. Should he go outside? And what do you think are the chances that he will follow the Clinton model if he takes, a whipping, a drubbing, as George W. Bush called it in 2006, in the elections in November?
Look, I think that I can tell you on very good authority that at the White House they totally reject the idea that he would adopt the Clinton model and move to the center. Now, that being said, everything is going to change in November. Even if Democrats retain control, they're going to be a smaller number of Democrats, and they're going to be more liberal proportionally. There's going to be a larger number of Republicans, and they're going to be more conservative relatively. So there's going to be fewer people in the middle for him to make whatever deals he might want to make. Now, that having been said, he's going to have to acknowledge in some way, whether it's the choice of a new chief of staff or something he says, that he got the message of this election. He's going to have to explain what he thinks it is. And then when you look forward at all the issues he's going to deal with, I don't think it's so simple as just staying on the left or moving to the center. The issues that are coming up are not health care, the stimulus, the bailouts. What they are deficit reduction, which by definition has to have a big bipartisan buy-in to work. The President's Deficit Commission, which reports on December 1st, I think, or in December, is talking about a formula of something like 3 times as many spending cuts to 1 tax increase. So maybe he could find a way to craft some bipartisan deals.
Yeah, let me bring Bill Kristol in, because I was going to ask you exactly that. Do you see areas of bipartisan agreement that this president and Speaker Boehner, just presuming, could find areas of agreement, whether it is on the deficit? Free trade is another area people talk about.
I think it's possible. I think the president has cleverly and sort of carefully gotten rid of the incredibly arrogant, cocky, smart Alex who dominated the White House in the first term. Rahm Emanuel, Larry Summers, Pete Orszag, they knew best. They were so clever, never let a crisis go to waste. We can jam stuff through, no problem. This president can carry anything off. That is not Pete Rouse's attitude. Pete Rouse worked for Tom Daschle for 19 years. He cut a lot of deals in the Congress. He's a liberal, but he's very different in tone and I think in governing philosophy from Rahm Emanuel. I love the way the whole media has decided to accept Rahm's story, that he's always wanted to be mayor of Chicago. Of course, he grew up in the suburbs, went to college in New York, worked in Washington, D.C., went back to Chicago in 1999. I bet you could Google Rahm Emanuel and never find him saying a word about being mayor of Chicago until it conveniently became his lifelong ambition so that they could give him a nice excuse for leaving the White House. So I think Republicans should not underestimate President Obama's willingness to get rid of people who he thinks maybe, for all their good intentions, haven't served him very well, and if not exactly pivoting to the center, governing in a different way than he did in his first 2 years.
Let me, Juan, bring you in on about Rahm Emanuel. Because, you know, the original line is, and Bill quoted it during the presidential transition, he said, never let a crisis go to waste, which meant let's take advantage of the financial situation to pass a lot of big legislation. But during the debate over health care, he reportedly wanted to go smaller, more incremental, and keep the focus on the economy. So my question is, who was Rahm Emanuel and what was his role these last 2 years?
Well, I think that Rahm Emanuel really was the deal maker, the guy who was sent up to Capitol Hill to twist arms, crack the whip and make sure that the Democrats serve the president's ends. Now, this is interesting because the criticism that's come from the left is that he was far too willing to compromise, and that's why you don't get the public option in health care. That's why you didn't get the level of spending that the left would have wanted in terms of the stimulus and get the results that they thought would have happened if you'd had a greater input at that time, and why you haven't seen the kind of populist anger at Wall Street that they want. So the left thinks that Rahm Emanuel was far too willing to compromise. Now, I must say from the right, the idea is, you know what, Rahm Emanuel is a guy that, will take no prisoners, that Rahm Emanuel was a hard person to deal with in terms of getting phone calls returned and all the rest. But, I think there's fear and intimidation as a legitimate part of American politics. That's been Rahm's stock in trade. It's time to move on. I think the president feels that way. And I think Pete Rouse, who's been the president's confidant and who, was described earlier, is much more of a low-key personality, willing to make deals, will do much better with both sides of the aisle.
Before we run out the clock here, Chris, it is worth pointing out that Rahm Emanuel, as Juan did, is not popular on the left. And in fact, if the president were trying to make peace with the left, one of the things he could have done was to get rid of Emanuel. It wasn't the first time I'd heard that Rahm Emanuel wanted to be mayor of Chicago. I'd heard that for a long time. And what's more, you see some of the people who are still around. Yes, Larry Summers is gone, but David Axelrod is around and will be around until he takes off to run the campaign. Robert Gibbs is still present. I question whether there's anything that's really at the core of the Obama White House that has changed.
So, and we have about 30 seconds left, Britt. You think this is still a liberal, progressive, whatever, left-wing presidency and White House?
Well, he still has the opportunity, Chris, after the election. Pete Rouse is named as an interim. He could be named the permanent, but new chief of staff. But if the president wants to make a change, he still has plenty of opportunity to do that before the new Congress is sworn in. I just say, well, all I'm saying is we don't see it yet.
All right, panel, thank you so much. We'll see you next week. And don't forget to check out the latest edition of Panel Plus, where our group picks right up with the discussion on our website, foxnewssunday.com, and we promise we'll post the video before noon Eastern time. Up next from Louisville, Kentucky, we go on the trail.